there's a lot of organizations that are just sort of in the skills curious part of the world at the moment, and they don't yet have a strategy. And so they need to spend a little time just educating themselves about what this is and what it isn't and how they want to approach it and what their overall strategy and path is going to be, both from a talent strategy perspective and from a business strategy perspective. That's certainly one. Another challenge we talked about already is the idea of making sure this is business driven and not overly technology driven. Building taxonomies that don't collapse under their own weight is a challenge for some companies.
Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the HR Huddle. I'm your host, Teri Zipper. I'm the CEO and managing partner at Sapient Insights Group, and I'm back for another exciting episode of HR We Have a Problem. This is the show where we like to break down the big and most relevant HR issues of the day. We help you make sense of what they mean for you, and we talk about what you might do about them. So joining me today is Craig Friedman. Craig is a 30-year veteran in human capital and talent as both an executive and an entrepreneur. He's currently the talent and skills transformation leader at St. Charles Consulting Group. And he's also the author of Enterprise Skills Unlocked, a blueprint for building a skills-based organization. Welcome, Craig. It's great to have you.
Thanks, Terry. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. Where are you today?
I am in a suburb of Chicago today.
Awesome. Well, I know you and I met a few months back to kind of talk a little bit about skills, and in particular, your book about skills. As I think I mentioned back then, skills are hard, at least from my perspective, and they're laborious. And frankly, I don't know anybody right now that's doing it all that well. So I was hoping that we could talk about what you've learned over your career and how you've brought skills to life in this book and sort of what you see, where you see this going. Does that sound like a good plan to you?
Yeah, sounds great.
Awesome. Then let's get into the huddle. So before we dive in and start talking specifically about skills, I thought you might want to give just a little bit more background on yourself. You've got quite the career. And I don't know if this book is your capstone, but it sounds like you've got a lot of things going on.
Yeah. Yeah. So have been a human capital and talent consultant for about 30 years. I was with Accenture in the beginning of my career for 10 years, Deloitte for 15 years, shortly before joining St. Charles. And in the middle there, I helped during the 2000s start up a couple of internet startups that were e-learning focused. And I've been with St. Charles now for about 5 years. I focus mostly on enterprise learning strategy. So I work mostly with chief learning officers and chief human resource officers trying to implement sort of their global corporate strategy around learning.
Awesome.
And
Well,
in
skills are
particular, the
tied
last
to
couple of
this.
years, I'm sorry. In
Yeah,
particular, the last several years, I've been focused a lot on this area of skills-based organizations, skills-based talent management.
yeah, yeah. It's a big topic. It's a very hot topic right now. Why don't you set some foundation for the listeners? Because I want to talk about how you think about enterprise skills in this broader context of the workforce and kind of what your working definition of it so that people understand kind of the angle that we're coming from today.
Yeah, well, one of the reasons we titled the book Enterprise Skills was because this whole area of skills-based talent management is largely a data-driven transformation across all of talent or across all of HR. So mostly what it's about is, if you think about the last 30 years, most of our HR systems have been focused at the person level, right? We hire a person, we give them a job title, salary, benefits, stick them in a box in an org chart where they typically stay for a period of time until they find another box in the org chart that they like better. But it's all operating sort of at that level of the person, at the headcount level. Skills-based organization is about building a data infrastructure underneath all of that that is more granular. That's what skills is providing, right? And so if you have what we mean by enterprise skills is the notion that you have sort of comprehensive skills data linked all across the talent ecosystem. So not just, about me, my personal skills, linked to people and training courses, but also linked to jobs in the job architecture, linked to work tasks, maybe in a talent marketplace or in a, process definitions, linked to capability planning and workforce plans. It's really underlying the entire talent infrastructure. And largely what that more granular level of information does is it enables us to implement a suite of talent strategies that are more targeted, more flexible, more efficient in a variety of different ways, right? So it's mostly and what's really critical about that is that skills data is kind of unique in the sense that on the one hand, it's a piece of HR data. It's telling you about me and what I can do. But when you roll up skills information, it's actually a piece of business data. It's telling me about the capability of my business. What are we capable of? What products and services are we capable of delivering to clients? So that actually brings talent management from a little bit of a headcount management exercise to a capability management exercise, which is a giant step forward in being better aligned with our business partners.
Yeah, I think one of the things we saw in the survey this year, and I don't know that it's different from last year, but it obviously continues to evolve as AI becomes a bigger part of the ecosystem. But skills and knowledge were one of the biggest factors or biggest challenges, sort of roadblocks to people implementing AI, right? They just don't know they don't know if they have the skills, but they think they don't, right? And they don't
Hmm.
necessarily have the infrastructure to know whether they really do.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes without saying that all of this is only possible because of AI, right? The reason we're talking about skills so much right now is largely because, up until now, it was all a company could do to stay on top of managing their own headcount, right? With all the people coming and going and transfers and secondments and leaves of absence and everything. The idea of multiplying that by 10 or 20 or who knows how many skills per person was just more than we could manage. But, new data analytics tools and especially new AI tools that help us deal with unstructured data are the core of all the systems that have been coming out to support all the skills-based talent management kinds of stuff. So, the talent marketplaces, the skills taxonomies, the applicant tracking systems, all of that are using AI to manage the skills data, and that's what actually makes it possible.
So managing, basically, it's bringing all of those skills data together without us necessarily building this complex architecture of skills that we need. We've got the data already baked into other platforms that we have across the enterprise.
Well, in most companies today, skills data exists, but it's pretty unstructured and nascent, right? So outside of the learning
Yeah.
organization, which may have a formal list of skills that they are teaching, and it depends a little bit on the company because some of them don't tag their metadata as well as they might like to. But they usually have pretty good information on skills. But staffing systems and job architectures and applicant tracking systems and performance management systems and don't always have, sometimes it's in spreadsheets, sometimes it's even less than that. It's what people know and you have to reach out to people to know who's good at doing what. So part of this process is formalizing all of that data, actually capturing it and building it into our technology system so we can leverage the strength of the technology to help us find the person who's got the right skills more quickly, for example, from a staffing perspective, right? Because now everything will be documented. A lot of times now, if you wanted to find someone who, was great at cybersecurity, you just have to talk to someone who is in that part of the world and, knew the various different employees and they'll give you a recommendation. Now you could look it up. You could look up their skills, you can look up their proficiency level in a high functioning system that have validation methods or badges to show exactly, what they know and what they don't know. And then the system could automatically tee up things like he would be good for these kinds of jobs, or he would, needs this kind of training to close the gap between your current project and what he knows, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. So how does that tie back into sort of, our job descriptions and, how is that playing a larger role? Like it sounds to me like the skills are becoming more project based versus not me as an individual have skills, right? And those
Hmm.
skills may or may not be documented somewhere or captured somewhere in the technology. So is this becoming really just a question of what do we need and where? from an organizational perspective, or are people still building sort of these more complex enterprise skills-based architectures for, understanding what these roles and these different jobs within the organization need to be able to do?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it depends a little bit on how advanced the vision is that the company is trying to go after. So, one of the basic starting points would be to just make sure that you've got skills tagged to your job architecture. So, every job description has a list of skills associated with it. Foundational to do the job, and then sort of more advanced skills for people who are excelling, in that job category. And that has advantages right there without any other advancement because you can post that and make it public. And I can look up the skills very publicly as to what I need for advancement. And the system will say, you have these skills currently, and this is what you need for advancement. And it could tee up not only training, but potentially staffing assignments that will help close those skill gaps, or experts who can help mentor you to get up those skill gaps, or maybe even communities of practice in the organization, all kinds of different things to help you close those skills gap. But not only just advancement, I could look up any job in the company. So if I'm interested in a lateral move, right now it's nearly impossible to construct some sort of learning path to get from, I don't know, procurement to marketing if I wanted to make a lateral move. And now I can just look it up. The system will automatically tag, okay, well, here's what you would need for that job move. Here's what you've got. Here's your learning path and all those learning resources to move you laterally from point A to point B. And so the whole notion of career mobility gets turbocharged, right? With the ability to just, anybody can, you can create a learning pathway between any 2 points in the organization almost immediately, right? And so
Yeah.
then, think of the talent implications of folks now being able to support a much broader set of possibilities for career mobility.
Yeah, mobility's been a big challenge, right? And I'm seeing more and more organizations now doing their best to hire from within, right? Because they know they have people who have these skills. It's a matter of finding them. And like you said, AI is making that a lot easier. But are there some other specific technologies that you're referring to, or just in general, the broad swath of skills technology or HCMs can offer some of these capabilities today?
Yeah, there's an ecosystem these days of skills-based technologies. I think there's something like a total of maybe 80, 90 vendors in the space currently that are playing in
Yeah,
different areas, depending on which area of talent they're bringing skills to bear. You've got tech that focuses on building the skills taxonomies and managing them. You've got talent analytics, either that focus in the company or in the labor markets to try to identify skills trends internally or externally and identify gaps. You've got applicant tracking systems that are now trying to build it into recruiting. We're adding skills to the core human capital management systems for sure, right? So now all the job descriptions are being tagged with skills. Obviously, you have talent marketplaces. That's a big deal
yeah,
in this space. So that's, it gets into resource management. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of different technologies that are coming out that are sort of tackling different areas of how can we apply skills to different areas of talent. And it takes, in most cases, a little bit of planning to actually construct sort of a technology ecosystem roadmap to sort of map out where you've got skills data today, what the gaps are for the future, where you've got gaps, where you've got redundancies, how are you going to build your new technology stack over time, how are you going to manage data coming out of different systems and harmonize it. So yeah, there's quite a bit of,
yeah.
tech piece to this.
Yeah, there is a lot of tech out there. And I think, one of the challenges for organizations is sort of defining what they want from it first, right? There's a lot of tech, but it's hard, a lot of people buy the tech, putting it in to think that's going to drive the outcomes when, really it's kind of the reverse. You need to know what those outcomes are, know what your goals are for from a tech perspective, and then pick the right tech, because there's a lot of fragmented capabilities, right? There's just sort of no one big skills solution. It's in a lot of different places. So I think that's one of the challenges, or one of the things people struggle with when making the decisions around tech for skills.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a big theme of the book. There's a lot in the book about having it be a business driven strategy that tech is enabling. But to some extent, this is not necessarily new. I mean, we've been implementing systems all over companies for a while. We know the
Yep.
challenges of doing a tech first implementation versus a business first. So it's not like we don't have lessons even with our in our own organizations of how to do this well, how to start with, functional requirements that are business driven and make sure that the tech is enabling what we're trying to achieve first and not just sort of turning on the tech for the sake of turning on the tech. So we know how to do this. We just need to leverage the lessons that the wonderful IT professionals have been teaching us for a couple of decades on how to do this well.
Yeah, we do. Although I see a lot of, and we see this in the data as well. There's over the last probably 5 or 6 years, there's been a lot of turnover from an HR perspective, and especially on, on the tech side. And so we've just sort of seen a lot of the lessons repeated, right? Because you don't necessarily have that institutional knowledge of what you've done in the past, or, there's just a lot of new things happening, right? So people get excited about shiny new objects and sort of jump the gun.
Yeah, it definitely happens, but some if you don't have it in-house, there are still people like me and consultants who you can help advise you have been through some of these transformations before,
Yeah.
if that's what's necessary to make it work.
Yeah. What are you seeing as the kind of the role of the individual in terms of their profile? And what do you think, or what are some of the primary use cases you're seeing right now from a skills perspective? I know you've mentioned a few, but what are you seeing as kind of the top ones?
Yeah, that's a good question too. A lot of it is industry specific. So one of the things we really like to work with companies on is building use cases that generate, top line or bottom line business value, right? So we like to interview various groups within the organization to understand their basic business plan and their business strategy and try to identify those places where the success of the overall business strategy is largely dependent on having abundant skills in the right amounts at the right time in the right place, right? So that we
Yeah,
can build infrastructure to support that business strategy. So the idea of, we need to grow rapidly, or we just piloted something that needs to expand, or the market is shifting and we need speed to market to get there ahead of the competitors, and somehow that's dependent on skills is one, kind of business case. But some of it is industry specific too, right? So you have certain industries that are suffering from talent scarcity and critical skills. Maybe it's baby boomers retiring or a shortage of technical skills, where some of these skill-based talent strategies are really effective at finding more flexible ways of finding critical skills that are scarce, or sharing them across the organization more flexibly, build, buy, rebadge, bot, etc. Trying to find a way to stretch short skills in certain industries like professional services and tech. Just the ability to make staffing more efficient can have, top line benefits to get people off the bench and more quickly billable,
yeah,
right? Has a very strong business case in certain parts of the world. And so the notion that a talent marketplace could make me 10% more efficient at staffing more quickly, I mean, that has, very meaningful bottom line impact to certain operating groups. So, it can be industry specific, but what we try to do is identify the place where we're getting the biggest bang for the buck first and stay focused on those operating groups, and then, move on to the next strongest business case where we can,
yeah.
drive value.
Are you seeing more on and is there a difference from a technical skills versus more of the soft skills?
No, but it does bring up the challenge of, so there is some governance and federation that needs to be sorted out with all these skills, right? Regardless of whether you're coming at this sort of one business unit at a time and then sort of connecting little pieces of a taxonomy together so that they can communicate, or if you're taking a top-down approach where you're trying to create a common language of skills that supports the entire enterprise all at once, companies realize very quickly that some skills are just outside of the purview of one central group to manage. Some groups are just going to be too technical, engineering skills or finance skills or technology skills, right? So you have to set up an infrastructure of who's best suited to manage the taxonomy over time, keep it up to date, prune it, but also set policy because different skills sort of have a different shape or feel. So if you're thinking about like pure technology skills, like programming skills, they turn over very quickly. But they're more objective in your ability to assess them and measure them, right? You either can program in Python or you can't. So they have flatter taxonomies and they turn over more quickly. Now you go into, sort of endurable business skills like communication or project management. Those skills change rarely. They tend to have lots of different models that you have to curate. They can be much more subjective in assessing whether you're a good negotiator or an expert negotiator. And so the various policies that you're building into managing that data can be different. So some companies have decided they're going to federate their governance to manage different areas of that taxonomy separately, but have a way that they can communicate and share reporting data across so that they can be more effective.
Yeah. What are you seeing as like some of the biggest challenges that organizations face and kind of getting skills implemented in a meaningful and sustainable way?
Yeah, there's probably a few. I think so to start with, there's a lot of organizations that are just sort of in the skills curious part of the world at the moment, and they don't yet have a strategy. And so they need to spend a little time just educating themselves about what this is and what it isn't and how they want to approach it and what their overall strategy and path is going to be, both from a talent strategy perspective and from a business strategy perspective. That's certainly one. Another challenge we talked about already is the idea of making sure this is business driven and not overly technology driven. Building taxonomies that don't collapse under their own weight is a challenge for some companies so if you're taking the approach that you want to do, you want to build a taxonomy to support the entire enterprise all at once rather than doing it sort of business unit by business unit, it can be pretty easy to over-engineer a skills taxonomy that becomes very difficult to create and manage. So it takes a lot of discipline to focus on what do we need this skills data for? What business decisions is it supporting? Why do we need different levels of proficiency? Who's using that data for what and why? And to keep that at an enterprise level and not get pulled so far into where the learning team needs more detail, but the staffing people need more context, and the recruiters need more information about the scope and scale of these various skills, that you're trying to make one central database that supports everything. It can become really big. And so there are strategies that, I think different groups need to use to make sure that it's really focused, that everybody's getting what they need, but in the most efficient way possible, right? Different sort of data modeling techniques to give everybody what they need, but keep it sort of really tight and manageable.
Yeah. Is there a size? I'm just thinking about like size of org. Like, when you're working with organizations, is there like an ideal size of org to when they should really start this process? I'm thinking about my own organization, which we're really small, but frankly, so it's easy to just like, everybody knows what everybody else's skills are. But at what point should you start thinking about how to do this in a more structured way so that it does then bear out as the organization continues to grow?
Yeah, I don't know that there's an ideal size. I mean, obviously, there's companies that are small enough that you're probably over-engineering a solution if you've got 10 employees. I don't know that you need a talent marketplace for 10 employees, for example, or a skills taxonomy for just 10 employees. But there's obviously going to be, I'm not exactly sure what the number would be, but there comes a point where like, if you're feeling like I can't stay on top of who knows what and how people are being developed. And, we have a formal training curriculum, but it seems a little unwieldy at the moment and nobody knows what's in it and what's being taught. And I couldn't even give you an accurate count of the number of courses in the learning management system. These are all pretty
Yeah.
good, triggers, but it definitely kicks in at larger organizations. I mean, I deal mostly with, very large organizations, and that's where, you increasingly see the benefits for it. But just because you're a very large organization doesn't mean you need to do this globally, enterprise wide. We work with plenty of customers where we just start with sales or, one of the product lines, that we pick a very particular business problem that's very focused and we say, we're going to build a skills infrastructure to support this business unit or a particular business objective, and we'll build from there. but let's kick the tires and figure out the processes and policies and make sure that we have at least one super solid value added example of this. And then we can, learn lessons from that process as we start to think about how to apply it more broadly.
Yeah, I can think of very few times when you'd want to start trying to do something of that scale enterprise wide versus starting with some areas that you can build some common ground and have some success and then model that framework in the next, in the next business unit.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it can be done, and we have clients that are doing it that way, and there's certainly technology that's designed to support that these days, but it does require extra discipline.
Yeah.
Right. Just if you're starting with a particular business unit, it'll provide focus and it'll simplify some of the decisions early on.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You have to build that discipline in yourself if you're going to try to start at an enterprise wide.
Yeah. Are there some things that you're seeing, some mistakes that you're seeing organizations make when trying to kind of operationalize this across the business, or things where you've come in to help them and realize there was kind of a disconnect and you needed to help them take a step back?
Yeah. Well, I think we dealt with a couple of them already, right? Like, so from a talent strategy perspective, I would say the boiling the ocean problem is probably one of the biggest mistakes,
Yeah.
and or just not having enough governance in place that if you're going to try to do a big play early on, that you're staying focused. That's probably one of the more common ones we see. I think from a business perspective, it's from a business strategy, it's not getting a business sponsor, right? Some of these things that start as talent initiative, and they sort of start as kind of like a housekeeping exercise, like let's get all our skills data organized without having a specific business problem that we're trying to solve, right? It's just a principle of change management, right? Like that's going to struggle more than if you've got strong sponsor from, one of your product lines, one of your business partners who's like, yeah, I need this to grow product and hit our growth targets for the year. He's going to support that in a big way. She's going to
Yeah.
support that in a big way, right? They'll put dollars behind it. They'll put resources behind it. They'll be very supportive. And if it's successful, which it should be, you'll have a strong champion for, yes, this is a very practical approach that works.
Yeah. I would say anytime you've got a significant initiative, you need somebody who is the sponsor, right? A strong sponsor for that initiative, or you'll have a lot of fits and starts.
Right.
Yeah. Part of the title of your book, I know you called it the blueprint for building skills-based talent management. I mean, everybody loves a blueprint, kind of a roadmap, like the guide, like, tell me the steps, right? When you think about what was your thinking when you built this out? I mean, was that your intent was to sort of give them this guide to getting from point A to point B, or did you have a larger plan in mind there?
Yeah, well, I think this started with just the idea that when I first started talking to clients about this, particularly the ones who are skills curious, there's a lot of misconceptions about what it is and what it isn't. Sometimes I think the word skills confuses people because a lot of people have the notion that this is mostly an L&D play. And
Mhm.
it's like I said, it's a data-driven, talent-wide kind of initiative. The focus on data is maybe new for some people. Like, they were thinking there's some books out there like, that talk about, jobs are going to go away, and that sort of confounds some people. I can't imagine a world without jobs. So it started as a sort of series of blogs to try to address some of the misconceptions about what it is and what it isn't. And to some extent, that led to more client conversations, which led to some research, which led to a benchmarking study, which led to, some more blogging. And eventually we started collecting things into a book so that we wanted to create a blueprint for people from strategy all the way through implementation, right across the talent value chain. Here's a methodology for implementing a talent marketplace. Here's a methodology for creating a skills taxonomy. Here's all the steps involved from, a maturity model. Step one, let's benchmark where we are and where we want to be, all the way through actually implementing these strategies. Hadn't seen a lot of that in the marketplace, right? There was thousands of articles, but most of them are pretty short and are pretty strategic in terms of, the global implications of, what you can do with these things, but weren't seeing a lot of practical guides. for implementation. So that's a big part of why we tried to create the book.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's important for people is, they like to have some framework in which to build upon. And talking about skills, just like talking about AI and any of the other big topics that are, again, these sort of shiny objects out there or things that sound like they'll solve our problem. Sometimes you really just have to ask yourself, what are the real underlying challenges that we have? And is skills the right thing to help us solve that, or is it something else, right?
Right. Yeah. And the book is peppered with, I think, maybe 80 different case studies with
Yeah.
examples of how different companies are trying to push this forward. So like I said, we tried to be very practical and provide tangible examples across a variety of industries of what people are doing and what they're learning. So
Yeah.
again, something very practical that people could, use to try to pull their skill strategy forward.
Yeah. It's a long title. Do you want to repeat it so people can?
Oh, it's Enterprise Skills Unlocked, a blueprint for building skills-based talent management, I
There you
believe.
go.
Yeah.
Put that in your search criteria and pull it up. I think it'll be worth reading. Are there some specific, or some key metrics that people are using to kind of understand the impact their skills strategy is having on the organization and the results they're getting?
Yeah, with any metrics program, with any big project, you want to create a metric strategy, right? And there's going to be some that focus on impact and some that focus on sort of adoption and some that focus on just status, right? But in terms of impact, which is usually what we care about, I think the metrics we're trying to do up front when we're going with, so I'll give you an example. We worked with a mining client. They mine copper because of certain changes going on in the world about shifting to more sustainable forms of energy. A lot of these energy sources require more copper wire to make them work. And so the copper mining company needs to dramatically expand their copper mining operations. There's only so much copper in the planet. And it turns out today, most of it is close to the surface of the planet. But if they're going to have to like double or triple output, they're going to have to dig deeper to get it. Underground mining is a completely different set of engineering challenges than surface level mining, right? So they have a skills gap that's critical to the expansion of their business strategy, right, in terms of the total amount of copper output.
Yeah.
And so in teeing up a skills strategy that tried to support them finding these, and it turns out, of course, these geotechnical mining skills are scarce in the world. We're just graduating
Of
fewer of
course.
these people, and STEM talent more and more is shifting towards high tech, and maybe it's difficult to keep them excited about underground mining. So for a variety of reasons, the number of people are shrinking at the same time that the business need is expanding. And so, we work with them to try to think about how different strategies could help, skills-based talent strategies could help them close that gap. And those are the targets, right? It's the targets of, you start with, we want mining to mine this much more copper out of the ground. And to do that, we need this many people with this many skills. And to do that, we've got to recruit this many, we've got to build this many, we've got to rebadge a certain number of people in the organization to do it. And so, you start cascading the metrics down from there. That's the approach we prefer. But as you can imagine, it's sort of a balanced scorecard, right? So you've got a set of impact metrics, and then in order to do that, you need adoption metrics. Once you create the strategies, you got to get everybody on board and track that. And then you just got the overall status metrics of, how much of the taxonomy have we built and how many profiles have been in place and are up to date and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Have there been any like specific barriers in the organization that have kind of held this back, short of not having a good sponsor? I mean, are there other barriers that challenge organizations with getting this off the ground?
I think a lot of it is articulating a strong business case, I think, to the organization as a whole. There's some leadership and governance challenges too. It doesn't neatly fit exactly anywhere. It tends to gravitate a lot for the chief learning officer because everybody hears skills and they're like, oh, certainly the chief learning officer is our skills expert. But very quickly they start to realize that like, oh, wow, this has broad talent implications and I need to bring in a group of people to help me do this because it's about more than just the learning piece of the puzzle. And so then you start getting into governance. There's always challenges bringing together, cross-functional governance teams and, getting the commitment of leaders to support that and finding the time to execute it. So, I mean, once you've got the strategy, I mean, it's an exercise to come up with a little binder that articulates the strategy, or the PowerPoint deck that articulates the strategy. But then to bring it to life, you've got to get at least a little leadership governance framework in place to guide it over time. And, that can be a challenge organizationally.
Yeah. Is there kind of a, what have you seen in terms of kind of average timeline from start to fin? Like by the time you start to build your strategy to the time you've actually implemented something. And I know it depends organization by organization, but does this take 6 months? Does it take 2 years? On average,
Yeah,
what are you seeing?
yeah, that's a real good question. And I think a lot of it has to do with sort of articulating how big a journey you want to go on in the first place.
Yeah.
Right. If your immediate goal is let's come up with strategy and implement the talent marketplace, that's not such a long journey, right? You spend a few months coming up with a strategy. You'll spend a few months coming up with implementing a talent marketplace. It depends on how big you're going to implement the talent marketplace and like, do I have to first pick a piece of software or do we have something in house? So do I have to go through an RFP process, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But it doesn't need to necessarily take a long time. It depends a lot on the choices that companies make, which is one of the, things that's in the book is spending a lot of time thinking about here's all the dimensions. How many do you want to tackle? How many do you want to tackle at first? How far do you want to push this? Right? We have like a maturity model that's got like 23 dimensions in the book, and 5 levels of maturity. There's no law that says you have to tackle all 23 and bring them all to level 5. It's perfectly appropriate to say we're only going to focus on these 3 or 4 or these two, and we're just going to notch it up 1 level for now, and
Yeah.
we'll reassess, right? It can be, if you're really committed to making a big transformation, a multi-year journey, right? Because you've got the whole talent ecosystem to realign, and potentially, if you want to do it at an enterprise level, across all the business units. So obviously, that's
Yeah.
going to be a long journey if you're really aggressive. But you can pick smaller ones that, you can implement. We certainly implement lots of things, inside a year. Strategy plus first project pilot, right?
Yeah.
Implemented inside of a year. So that's certainly possible.
Yeah, I think that's helpful for people. So, short of getting the book, which people probably should do if they're interested in building a skills-based organization, what is there some advice you would give people sort of getting started on this journey, or maybe who have tried to implement it and are struggling a little bit? Like, is there one piece of advice you might give them to get them back on track?
Learn about data-driven transformations. We have done this sort of thing in other parts of the company, typically, right? We've just done it with customer data or market data or product data, inventory data. We've had, right, like first we put everything on computers, then the computers started generating a lot of data. And then we said, oh, wow, with all this data, we can be much more nuanced with our decision making. We can see what's most profitable and what's taking the most time and which customer segments are performing best or slowly, right? And so then the second wave of sort of the digital revolution has been the data-driven part, right? Once the
Yeah.
systems were in place and they were generating data. And we've done that largely with the front part of the business first, and we do it with talent second, broadly speaking, right? As a general policy, is how we tend to attack these sorts of things. So this may be a little new for the talent part of the organization to have a data-driven transformation, but it's probably not new for your company, right? So spend a little time looking at how we've done data-driven transformations in other parts of the company, because most of those lessons are equally important for skills.
Yeah. Strike up a conversation or relationship with your data scientist or somebody in IT and get started, right? Learn something from them.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Craig. I'm really glad you joined me today. This has been a great conversation. Where can people find you online, on social? Where can they find your book and your blogs and all this stuff that you talked about?
Yeah, well, you can email me at cfriedman@stccg.com. You can find me at the St. Charles website, St. Charles Consulting Group. That's www.stccg.com. And you can find me on LinkedIn, Craig Friedman from Chicago.
Yes. Go look up Craig. He's in Chicago. All right. Well, thank you again. I want to thank our producers, the Brand Method Media Group, Kelly and her team. I want to thank our marketing team here at Sapient, Kendall, Summer, Caitlin, and a whole list of people. And thank you for tuning in. That's all the time we have this for this episode of HR We Have a Problem. I hope you'll listen to Stacy and Cliff next week as they spill the tea on HR tech. Also, by the time you hear this, the report will be out, the annual HR system survey. So I hope you'll go to the website at sapientinsights.com and check it out. If you enjoyed the episode, we'd love to hear from you. You can subscribe to it on your favorite podcast app and leave us a note or drop us a line on the website. We'd love to hear more from you about the topics that are important to you, or if you want us to do a deeper dive into skills. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of HR We Have a Problem. Thanks, everybody.